All right. So
Yep.
welcome everybody. I'm here today with also a part-time faculty, Pinar Guvenc, which is
Hello.
we both volunteer closely to a nonprofit called Open Style Lab. So we have some of the members of that nonprofit here with us to talk about disability and making experiences, and they'll be joining throughout the workshop online. But the goal of this workshop really is in call for a need of a framework and probably a guideline that could support all types of creatives. As maybe most of you guys know, in the new school, and Parsons alone has so many different disciplines of design, from product to architecture to fashion, that really design thinking diagrams do not really suffice or meet all of those needs. So the goal is to help maybe you guys and us and everyone here to reimagine what framework actually works for us and how can it help with the design process become more accessible, especially when we're dealing with communities such as disabilities and aging. And to start off, we're going to show a few case studies. My name is Grace Jun. I am an assistant professor of fashion here at the New School at Parsons.
I'm Pinar Guvenc. I'm part-time faculty at School of Design Strategies at a Master's in Strategic Design and Management. As Grace mentioned, on our other lives, we also team up at Open Style Lab, as well as I do manage an architecture and design studio on my day-to-day.
So you'll hear from Christina, who there's a nice, beautiful picture over there. Maybe we can start with an open discussion first before we go into the case studies, maybe just a few icebreakers. And one thing I wanted to ask everybody here is, how might accessibility affect your practice, research, or design work?
Hi, I'm Alex. I'm part-time faculty in Strategic Design and Management, BBA, at Parsons. And also I've been working with the Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, specifically around the design and innovation group. And we are trying to figure out how to make sure we consider digital accessibility through our projects more regularly. So I'm very curious to see what you all have been working on.
Great.
I can go. I am Marley. I'm actually a student in the SDM BBA program. And this semester I'm working on a project to make Paris a more accessible smart city. And so we've just been doing a lot of research and reading, of course, like thinking about the limitations of who I've been reaching out to and the audiences that have been easy to find, and therefore the voices that are most commonly heard. Now I think it's a really great time to learn how to expand the reach.
Great. Thanks for joining us. And we're getting some also further comments on chat, which is open to everyone, so we can follow there. And I guess if no one else wants to go, we can continue.
Yes. I mean, I think it leads to other challenges, right? I'm wondering if this question is just in general, again, if you guys found any challenges addressing diversity and or accessibility. Making-based machines don't go up and down. Agreed. For different heights. Yes, agreed. For people in different seated positions or different body postures. Another one.
Agreed, Alex. Yes.
Yes, already first. For those who are joining that have very little experience about the disability community, it's really not about disability at one point. It's really about all of us. Even now, as we think about it during this pandemic, having people of such diverse needs, right, as we go forward. This is why it's important to look at frameworks, design projects, thinking, creative methodologies that are accessible. A little bit about Open Style Lab. We're a nonprofit research practice, and we're a 501c3 organization. So the goal of this organization is to make style accessible, and we've been focusing a lot on clothing, wearable tech, or other products. And as you'll see, a lot of the case studies come from working with this organization.
So here is a question.
Does anybody want to share their thoughts or have any projects that were similar?
Hi, I'm Yu-Chen. I'd love to answer this question. So recently, with Corona and also with the global pandemic and global warming, with effects like wildfires and all of that. I know, sorry, I'm mentioning all these really horrible things. But with PPE, there are a lot of questions for designers. How do you design something that are accessible for people with different ability as well, especially in these really vulnerable times? So that's something that's been on my mind.
Yeah, that's a great question.
I was really interested in the quote that you had when you did the sewing kit with the girls from NYU, and the idea that the design process in a lot of ways it's reaching out to these communities where then you can offer your skill set as a designer, but the means to design and to create are really limited for other communities where it's kind of where it's not made for, where there's just a disconnect in the design of the product. And so I thought that the sewing kit that you had created that would allow other audiences to sew and participate in making their own solutions is really cool. It reminds me of, there's something on people that were 3D printing larger light switches or like other solutions for around their house, where once you have the tools, you can make your own solutions and you can share, for at least 3D printing, you can share that code where then other people then can have your solution implemented in their homes. So thinking about, you can share freely and they can inspire other people.
This is Alex again. At MSK, I've been working in more of a digital space, and I think it's been interesting to realize how I've been thinking of it as two kind of paths, one being coming up with alternative, and I guess most of my work has been focusing on the digital patient portal and how people use that and have access to it or not. So one path seems to be coming up with alternative communication channels for people who just do not want to or don't have the tools to connect to the digital portal. And then the other has been thinking about how to make that digital tool itself as accessible as possible, with things like, people who aren't comfortable interacting with the screen, making really forgiving taps and larger buttons that they can tap more easily.
When you scale accessible designs, how do you create a hierarchy of needs when you can't logistically or financially meet them all?
Well, we have this problem every day.
Yeah, I think that's sort of, after 5 years of research and co-creating with people with disabilities, the initial answer to scale was the toolkits. We recognize some repetitions and in details, whether those are like enclosures or tools that were needed during dressing process or in clothing. And that sort of enabled us to prioritize some of the most common fixes or hacks that are needed for a clothing or dressing process. But as you pointed out too, there has to be a hierarchy in the sense that for the first prototype, you can't address all. Like, you have to actually focus on a few things, perfect them, and then move on to the next. In our toolkit, the first prototype addresses the needs of pockets and needs of loops while dressing. So we do recognize that does not cater to people with all abilities, but that was the most immediate needs of the group that we're working with. And given that research enabled us to create accessible tools as well for making and sewing, it sort of broadened the horizon in terms of what else could be added to that. So I mean, I guess like going into accessible design, you have to go in with the idea that it will always remain as a prototype and there's always room for improvement, because it is very hard to achieve a truly universal design, right? We can only make it better and better and better. And it really takes people with diverse backgrounds and abilities to be able to achieve that. So we have a lot more room to improve in anything that we do and in any field, really.
Another thing is going backwards, right? I just briefly talk about who gets the power to design. So like even today, we're here to really do a framework. And I think that actually helps scale projects. Everybody else needs to figure out their own method and how to collaborate with each other and more groups, especially even in New York City, for all of the disability and hospital groups that we have here today to be able to make better designs. So I think for us, how we scale is actually rethinking it to the bare bones of like, what are the tools? What are the learning outcomes? Or who gets to access what? Without further ado, I want to kind of introduce our next speaker, Christina.
Hey,
Hi.
how are you?
Hi, Christina.
Hey, how are you guys? Kind of wanted to talk about really the importance of these inclusive design frameworks. You've seen the ones out there that have focused on really like an employee standpoint and like a culture standpoint. You've seen them for architecture, a little bit for universal design, but there aren't many for inclusive design. There's slightly one done by Microsoft, but that is really for like technical products. These are really important. So to give you a little bit of a background, I'm Christina. I lead accessibility and inclusive design for Wunderman Thompson, WPP. And they are the biggest creative company in the world. We create 1 out of every 5 ads. So we create culture a lot of the times. And that's something that Parsons also does. One thing I was noticing when I became disabled about 9 years ago, that all of these creators were making me disabled, really, because World Health Organization, they define disability as a mismatch between the person's ability and the environment. So basically, I'm disabled because of designers. And designers have as much importance as doctors do. And I think, these type of frameworks are really important. When I bring that up to my clients and things like that, they're shocked. So what I did in my agency was I tried to bring frameworks of how do you design an ad, how do you design a website, and different things like that using inclusive design frameworks. And what that does is this framework allows for all of the work coming from, I think we have over 280,000 employees, to make sure that it's inclusive because of this framework. And I have a feeling that this framework will be just as beneficial for the Parsons students and also for the employees, but then also for the world. When it comes to design, it's my biggest challenge and my biggest excitement. I think that, the better designs that have been successful in this world, when you look at the touch screen, you look at the curb cuts and the email and voice activation, they were all created looking at edge cases, and now they work for everyone else. So really thinking about when you're creating this framework, design for the edge case first, and it usually works for all. All of the great inclusive design products that I have seen, it's all about providing multiple ways to do the same thing. And I'll give you an example of that is, the Xbox controller from Microsoft. That's the adaptive controller that they created. And then you have a pad that you can hit with any part of your body. So if you have no arms or, no legs, you can hit it with your bum and you can play. And another thing they're going to do is in the future is add in voice activation. So multiple ways to do the same thing to reflect the multiple abilities of one's body. And I think that's what I hope the output of this framework will be. When it comes to, you put this framework together, how do you include all disabilities? I really try to group disability into these 4 groups, which is motor, cognitive, visual, and hearing, as that allows for me to really understand the 4 groups. And every time in my design processes, I have my teams talk to someone with one of those disabilities from those groups. Just because, I have a disability in my arms, I can't really speak for someone who has a visual impairment. So it's really getting those diverse perspectives of those 4 people is key. And I think that could be some part of your framework as you go and think about how do you build this into something that's realistic. Not everybody's going to be able to talk to 4 people to get something done. So what I suggest is making like profiles of challenges, like personas of 4 people with those disabilities, and then you can refer to that. But I mean, real lived experiences, nothing beats that. I think when it comes to why more brands aren't doing this, I feel like that's what drives a lot of people's actions if a brand's going to pay for it or a brand wants it. The reason is because there is no instructional guide. There's nothing out there. So I think this framework will really help brands take that leap into looking at inclusive design. There's really no universities that are talking about inclusive design besides like OCAD, and then Cambridge does a little bit, but no one's talking about it from a real like design perspective. And that's where I think creating this could really change how things are done in the design world. And there's such an importance. And then also with coronavirus, I think everybody is going to really have their empathy muscles active. You see people being extremely thoughtful about their neighbors, thoughtful about moms with kids, and are they able to teach that lecture, or are they able to do that extra project? And that thoughtfulness is what was lacking, I think, sometimes in design. So I think coming out of coronavirus, there's going to be such a demand for purpose-driven brands. And I think that a big part is going to be social sustainability. And this framework allows for brands and students to get to social sustainability. Social sustainability, you can see the immediate effects. I think the other thing is social sustainability is a bipartisan issue. Republicans care about people with disabilities. Democrats care about people with disabilities. So I think that inclusion is, from a disability perspective, is very important. And I think that once you start to be more inclusive, the products just tend to be better. I think that these type of frameworks should be coming from institutions, not companies, because then you get that inherent bias. And I think how you can push people to really care about this, and this is what I do when, I talk to them, I say, like, okay, companies were like product centered, now they are human centered. I think post coronavirus, they're going to be inclusive centered. If you need to compete with other brands, you need to really focus on inclusive design, as that's the main trend. Satya Nadella, who's the CEO of Microsoft, he said his 2020 trend was inclusive design. That was going to become normalized. But that's really my show. I don't know. Are there any questions?
Hi, Christina. I just really love the phrase. You mentioned edge customer or edge.
You can be edge
cases.
Customer, edge case. So really the 20% on because designers use the bell curve model. It really doesn't work.
Oh.
And people need to look at how they're using these old design frameworks to look outside. And because we have mass customization and we can create things very unique, why are we still using the same design frameworks from so long ago?
Yeah, I totally agree with you. When I was first in design school, I was taught to design for the majority, think about that. And I think this should be changed as a design concept and framework completely for all design schools. And I'm really thankful to know that phrase, and I'd love to pass it on to my classes as well.
Oh, please do.
Yeah, definitely. So thank you so much.
I probably stole it from somebody else. I think it's all the articles I read, but I think it's important. Also, just working with all these brands, we saw for one major retailer, which you guys all know the brands, that does adaptive clothing, they saw a 3 times return on investment for creating an adaptive line. But it wasn't the direct sales of the adaptive line. It was the adaptive line brought in new customers or lagged customers. So let's say they went in to buy the adaptive clothing line for themselves, and they looked at on the page, oh my God, these, they've actually really updated their designs. I'm going to go buy something more. So even though, if a student or a brand they're trying to get money from says, this is a small market, I don't know if we're going to make money, people with disabilities and their community, and their community is considered, their immediate household, have a disposable income of $8 trillion. All of China has a disposable income of $8 trillion. So basically, this community and making things inclusive from a disability perspective has the same buying power as China. So why is no one considering inclusive design, but everyone is considered China as one of their growth markets? You guys are designing the world, and that's a lot of power. You get to decide who gets excluded or included. And with that power, you guys have morality, and then you have business sense. And what I do is, I try to present both when I'm getting people to do things, because you don't know which is going to make them move.
Yeah.
We did a study, the Female Quotient, which is a group I'm a part of, with Google, to see ads, how do ads influence people? And I know that working, with Grace in her class, having that story around your design is so important. Mm-hmm. And ads and stories around inclusivity. Someone saw an ad around inclusivity. They were 70% about to either buy that product or at least share it on their social media. So I think that it has like a real place to stay, and it's important that these frameworks get out because no one has any guidance. 4% of businesses are thinking about accessibility inclusion, only 4%. And I always ask the CEOs, like, why do you not think about it? And they don't think, they say they think about it, but they are, one, don't know all the facts and figures, like how big the group is. And the second is they're scared to make a mistake. Making this framework a collaborated, because here's the interesting thing is that design thinking always has inherent biases because it's the designer that's creating it, and it's only ever a few designers. But if you can democratize design thinking, and in this framework you have multiple people with different lived experiences, I think that's the new and the real, that's inclusive design thinking.
Christina, do you want to share anything about how, and is there an experience that you think everybody has, but maybe, we've related in different ways?
I think relating is important. If you don't see yourself in things, you don't see yourself as worthy. When you look at relating, the only human characteristic that everyone goes through in their entire life is disability and exclusion. It's the one thing that we know for a fact everyone will go through at some point. So I think honing in on that is important.
Any other comments, questions? If not, we can say thank you to Christina. I mean, we're going to continue on a relating exercise that our persona will actually be Christina in this case for the sake of time instead of 4 different people. But we did hear a little bit about her, the way she hacks the environment and also her day-to-day and what her thoughts and beliefs are when it comes to design. So that should be helpful for our relate exercise. All right, so the next we will be relating, ideating, creating, and reflecting back to create our own framework that is best fit for our practice. I'm going to share a link to you all. We will now take this exercise to relate to Christina. And for that, we will be using an empathy maps. So considering our persona here is Christina, please start filling out some of the things that she might say, think, do within a day, or feel about design. So we can give 10-15 minutes for this collective exercise, and then after that we can sort of sit back and see what we put down and discuss how we related.
For some of the new people joining, Christina had given a lecture a little bit about her life living with ALS and some of the challenges she had with clothing, as well as the subway system not being accessible because she cannot use both of her arms due to paralysis. So just think of hands-free issues around design and creative thinking.
She does have muscle power, like strength on her like upper torso, so she can actually like maneuver with her upper body, her neck. But usually like how she functions in day to day, like she is a avid typer with her toes and uses a big iPad to do so. Okay, I guess if any of you want to sort of share what you've added in, you can start discussing collectively and then sort of recapture some of the things we've covered here.
I'll go first. I think I guess that she thinks I would love to design my own clothes because it sounded like she really enjoyed working with the Parsons students to design clothes together. And then one thing that was really cool also she said was human-centered design should be for all humans, not just 80%. She says around design thinking, inclusive design is the trend for 2020, and it should be for a very long time. And general design thinkings are pretty old. I guess she would say I can't use utensils in public restaurants, but that's just something I'm wondering, how does she deal with that? And in the does part, I saw someone else also wrote she travels a lot all the time. I think that was really big. I guess when she mentioned it, I'm just thinking about all the different challenges. And then she also deals with big CEOs, work with large corporations. And then in the fields section, I imagine she feels really frustrated with public facility, passionate about teaching designers about edge customers, and helpless when subway workers can't really help her because of the system, how the system is set up.
Yeah, a lot of great captures there.
Anybody else? Or we can just read off of it as well.
Yeah, general design thinkings are old. Designers have so much power to decide how I interact with the world. That's so true. She did say she is disabled by design. Designers can make big difference in people's life. The aesthetic of a product can make just as big as a difference as its function. Inclusive multidisciplinary teams are needed. 4 categories to think of for accessibility: motor, hearing, seeing, and cognitive. And I guess on top of these, like for thoughts, we can also try to relate to the things that sort of go through her head on a day-to-day, right? Like they can be frustrations or things that she likes, that works for her. Like, for example, like when she's trying to dress, right? And some of the things that we listed out as she does, what is she thinking? And what is she really feeling, right? So some of the things she does, obviously she gets dressed in the morning like everyone else eats and drinks, of course. And she actually does go to restaurants often. She brushes her teeth, takes a shower, and she does those by herself with no help, actually. So we can think how that is also possible. Like, she travels a lot. She can be on an airplane and then she might be very thirsty. She may not be able to drink any water because she doesn't have access to a straw. So like those type of like frustrations is probably in her day to day. And to her point, like it is our the designer's job to really resolve those issues. So with this exercise, hope it was helpful to a little bit immerse yourself into her life and start thinking of how she's going about her day to day. And as we are doing that, let's move on to ideating around some objects that they relate to Christina, our person, and try to think of ways that how these could be accessible to her. We're going to break you out into groups so you can work with your group with your assigned product. I guess we can give 15 to 20 minutes for you to work and ideate on that. And then we'll come together and share what we've created. All right, how was that? Do you want to share anything you might have or any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, with our group, I had Ellen and also Aviva in my group, and we were really talking about first like a bunch of ideas for cups, but then we took a step back and we kind of looked at like, how do we start identifying all of this in the first place? And we noticed that we identified first the placement in relation to the body. So we were ideating ideas based on how we thought it would relate to Christina's body. And then we came to context, like what kind of environment is she is, that she needs a cup, and how is she going to be able to access that cup? And then we thought about the mobility aspect. So what if she's on the go? Where do we carry this cup? And where does this cup move? And finally, we talked about aesthetics to solve this design challenge. So actually design was like the last thing we thought about. And we had many ideas. If you ladies want to share, please let me know.
What was most interesting for me was what we immediately kind of thought the biggest issue was to solve, which is kind of the physicality and the ergonomics of the issue. And we kind of spoke about exactly why, because it's maybe a physical disability that Christina suffers with. That's why we thought about that first. But that's, in my own work, that isn't something that I'd kind of considered before, is like in what order of priority that I think about things in. So that was really useful for me.
Do you have any hack ideas for an accessible cup for Christina?
It was mostly about this idea of an NFL game. You've got the beer hat with like the straw that you go around in your mouth. That's like quite gimmicky. But we thought about kind of replacing that and a cup at different areas of the body. And then also the idea of kind of refilling or having a monitor to show you when the water supply is low, just to keep it really easy to use.
Wow, cool.
Just to add, I think that also we took in consideration also like the material itself, because if you carry it on the body, there is like the weight issue with the water, without the water. So we're trying to think about that aspect as well as the shape of the cup, like why it needs to be like traditionally like a round. Maybe it can be a different shape that it will kind of like blend better within the body posture, or or the ergonomic aspect of it.
Interesting.
Yeah, how about you guys, Pinar?
So we looked at the Care Collective product that they make for Christina. And like the first thing that stood out to us was like the material was stretchy. So because I know Sasha is also a one-handed dresser, so it seems like the stretchiness of the fabric is key for hands-free or like one-handed dressing. And the second thing is the loop that can be fastened, hooked onto different structures in her apartment to help with dressing, and relying on pre-existing furnitures and without having to purchase extra dressing items. And then Zena mentioned something interesting, which is like kind of a more techno advanced solution. So she mentioned seeing researchers developing little robots that help you zip up zipper. So then we had an interesting discussion about how to make something that is automated but also cost effective and also accessible to the mass market. Sasha, do you have anything that I forgot?
Just like another thought about having something like using a table or using a chair leg to get this stuff on, like putting a hook on the ceiling and having like a clip go on to the garment so that you can use your teeth or something to pull down, and then you can get the garment onto your legs in a way that would be able to work.
So like a modular lamp that helps you get.
Yeah, I'm imagining those the exercise pulled down things that people
One interesting thing for Christina too, since she actually likes support for her arms as they generally weigh on her shoulders because she cannot control them and there is no muscle power here. So typically she likes the use of pockets and incorporation of pockets, but generally pockets that woman pants have are really not pockets that you can use to rest your arms. So typically there needs to be like a modification of bigger or even more ergonomic and supportive pockets in a pants could be interesting, especially if we're considering like high waist pants. That could be.
So I mean, this was like really great because we could probably go on forever. We probably need 5 more workshops on thinking about ideas because there were just so many great things we were thinking. But maybe we can just think about an outline now to summarize our insights, because we all come from different backgrounds, different disciplines. I'm trying to think about how we're doing considerations and constraints, maybe acknowledging different disciplines. Maybe first we can start with values.
I mean, I guess values to the point, like, and basically explaining why we're doing this. The why in our case here is like pretty clear. Like we want to be as inclusive and socially responsible as possible, but there are definitely other things to incorporate, like sustainability, equity, accessibility, not only maybe through physical needs, but also affordability, which is why we discussed scale. And then acknowledging different disciplines is very important, especially, ideally, if you're doing it on your own, you have to see what is available to your discipline and work on that, which is why we encourage a multidisciplinary team so that everybody can within their own lens and perspective. And we co-create with people with disabilities because their point of view, even if they're in the same discipline, their background is a total win for us when we're designing something. We're already 50% ahead of the game.
So let's backtrack. Values, we seem to have 3 things: human first promise, and then material consciousness, or AKA sustainability.
I guess inclusion, obviously in our case.
Do you mean like inclusion as in whoever begins to think about the project, starts to make a project? Like where does that inclusion take place?
I guess that could be in how, hopefully in every single element that you can do. So say we're starting exactly like this sort of with Christina, like a specific kind of designing for Christina, but then we can kind of take it out and like test it on other people and see how they respond to it as well, how it could be included in different areas just to kind of make it wider.
How about when it applies to all different disciplines? This one is what I found the hardest. Would we say always choose writing or simple visuals to begin with?
Yeah, I think visual prompts is a good way. In the end, you know your business the best, or you know your discipline the best. So you can see an image and interpret your own discipline.
So should we be recommending, whatever discipline you're from, we need some sort of photo, a visual or a drawing, and a short written statement?
I think that the prompt, because I have in my mind, like the 5 or 6 steps of design thinking. And when you say like ideation, it's about sketching. When you say, prototyping, so it doesn't matter if the prototyping can be physical or system or whatever. So that's what comes to my mind.
I think also like just quotes, sometimes I remember certain quotes from people, whether I might have a voice recording off of a video that talks about different disabilities or abilities, to like a podcast I picked out from, Cool.
Picking up on that kind of not using like exclusive language to your own discipline is something that can be easily adapted in different ways.
So true.
Icons and symbols can be also, because I know it's related to visual, but still it can be universal icons.
And I guess regardless of the discipline, the exposure is really important, right? Like we might be an architecture studio, but we still might have to interview environmental psychologists when we're working on a project, or a doctor if we're working on a healthcare facility. So that interdisciplinarity is a must. So exposure for each discipline is very, very important.
I guess we all said focus on one person first to scale.
I feel you have to not just think about that one person. You have to think about their environment and like where they're going and they're going to be dealing with and all those kind of things, and think about all the other people that are around them.
You know, in general, an idea starts with an observation. So generally you observe one person, but then you are not conscious about it. And then you observe another person. The more you observe, I think that then you kind of like, you know, spark something that maybe there is a problem. Then you basically expand your research and really, you know, develop the empathy and really to identify your target market or your group of the people. And
that focus really allows you to come up with a solution, right? Because there are like millions of things to tackle. If we try to tackle all at once, it's never going to work. So really honing in on that one person and then their challenges and then their group's challenges, and how do you extend beyond? How do you create your prototype number 2?
What considerations do you think you would have as well? Do you think maybe your audience or age group? Because, you know, when I talk to my students, it's quite different when they're fresh in college and they're very ingrained in their discipline versus I think someone who is a bit more seasoned. Even the occupational therapist I've talked to who's like 55 knew about the maker movement and product design. So I just felt there was a disparity, you know, on the experience.
So for constraints, maybe also platforms access. So for example, like smartphone versus computer. Nowadays, smartphones are probably more accessible rather than like a program or like a page that's not mobile compatible. And also thinking about like where the information or content is hosted. Is it like a very niche website or like on Twitter or like social media that is publicly available to all people? For a lot of disability related information, they have their own forum. But like if you're not in this community to begin with, it's very hard for you to like land at that page, increasing the exposure and of community and more education example. I think that's like, you know, also related to that.
When you guys think of material consciousness as a value, do you also include like repurposing? I'm also thinking third world countries. Like I've been to parts of Asia and Africa where like we tried to talk about wheelchair accessibility and we made out of cardboards first. So it's really about what materials you have in your hand, given the state. And right now I'm thinking also of our students, some of them who are, they don't have, at home, they have no materials.
Yeah.
And how to be creative with that.
One of the things that we said to our students now, especially because of the situation, we tell them just look around the house, do kind of like an inventory, bring everything that you think, take a picture, and at least you can see, you can document like an inventory of material. And then based on the materiality and the needs, so you can like, you know, try to match and see what you can do with what you have.
So we could agree that the material consciousness comes in utilizing with what you have.
Not only just environmental friendliness, but also for a sustainable model, right? If we don't have materials, we're out of making. So how do we create a more sustainable model to be able to make sure we can continue to produce regardless of many of the constraints that we have? Obviously, if we have abundance of materials, then we can look into the could or should haves, right? Like, for example, not only there is a sustainability aspect of materiality, but also contribution to human mental health and wellness, which could be really beneficial for people with disabilities or aging. Like natural materials are always more better to promote human well-being, as well as color choice, texture choice could be really impactful.
I think that for the design processing, that what also we can add is that revisiting or being like flexible and open, because sometimes you have, you know, you go into one direction and then you realize that you have to go back actually if you step and to revise. So I think that this kind of, because design, it's not really like a linear process, like back and forth, it's kind of like a loops more.
Yeah.
So maybe just allow like the iteration or just, you know, like revisions.
I'm thinking that another constraint is communication. Yes, I'm thinking about visual impairment.
I think understanding, be able to communicate, sort of creating an accessible language around what we're trying to communicate to different disciplines or team members is very important. Like, explain it to me as if I have no degree in any education.
So it seems like there's like two things though, because like I think there's a mix of them. You know, it's really nice to have an insight of something that's very discipline focused, because I learned so much from occupational therapists or doctors. But then it's also the conflict of how do you share something specific without over bombarding it with language we don't share.
Yeah,
I think that's why visual is important.
I mean, we did talk about perceptibility, right? And the use of different like mediums to be able to communicate one thing. So definitely.
So I guess what we're going to do is from our side, creating a diagram that visually encompasses all this. And this will be shared as the Parsons Open Style Lab framework. And we will mention all of your names and share it to you all in your email. So hopefully you could use it for yourself or your students.